Okay, so most of us think about the Arctic when we hear about an iceberg melting or stranded polar bears. But today, the Arctic, of course, is one of the most important and rapidly evolving regions of the globe. And it's at the intersection of great power competition, climate change, and Indigenous rights. You could argue that in the Arctic, we are seeing the competition for the 21st century play out. So, what should America's role in the future of the Arctic be? And how do we balance the interests of the 7 other Arctic countries? Or will that be 6 if Greenland becomes part of the United States? Anyway, we are so glad that we have with us tonight Dr. Mary Thompson-Jones to answer some of these questions as she talks about her very timely new book, America in the Arctic, Foreign Policy and the Competition in the Melting North. So that said, welcome to tonight's Chat and Chowder. I'm Mary Eintema, President and CEO of World Boston. We're so happy to have everyone here today in the room or on the Zoom. As many of you know, the mission of World Boston is to foster international engagement and global cooperation. So we thank everybody for being part of the mission. Thank you to Foley and Lardner, our wonderful hosts, for providing this beautiful space. Thank you to my colleague, Harrison Zyberg, who is overseeing this event, and all of our other great World Boston colleagues and board members. If you're a colleague or a board member, raise your hand, and everybody come up and talk to us later. We also give a special thank you to the Lowell Institute, whose generous support allows us to bring you Chat and Chowder and great decisions free of charge, which is pretty special. Free of charge, of course, does not mean free of cost. So we make it easy for you. Please consider donating to World Boston. For a mere $25, you can get this stylish pin and become a community supporter. And then there's all sorts of great things that happen in your life and in international engagement if you consider sponsoring. I also want to give a special shout out to Roel Liebert and Stephen Monk, who recently donated to World Boston. And you can donate anytime using the QR codes on the screen or around the room. Also, want to mention that we recently put a widget on our website for donor advised funds, which is a very convenient way to donate. So please have a look at that. All right, onward. Upcoming events. It may be summer, but we keep on trucking with great events. June 17th, we host Dr. Corey Shake of the American Enterprise Institute for a Great Decisions program on the future of NATO. And more programs are filling in, but we do know that September 11th, we will have our signature Diplomacy Now program with Ambassador Nick Burns, who helped start this program a mere 8 years ago. So it's a great full circle moment. Don't miss that. And onward. Please do keep up with these events by checking on worldboston.org. And also we put flyers around the room. Sometimes it's easier to just have something in your pocket. Housekeeping, when we go to Q&A, please raise your hand and one of our colleagues will bring you a mic, and your question obviously will end with a question mark. And for those of you who are on Zoom, please put your questions into the Q&A box, not into the chat. We'll try and include some of them. And so that's one of the reasons that I'll be using my phone. I apologize, but it's a great way to communicate with my colleagues. After the Q&A, we'll be selling copies of this great new book for $20, which is a bargain, by the way, right over here. So if you have to run early, you can also scan the QR codes and purchase a book directly from the publisher's website. In that way, we're working for you. Yes. All right. Now, at last, it's my honor to introduce our speaker tonight, Mary Thompson-Jones. She is a professor of national security affairs at the U.S. Naval War College in Newport, where she is also the chair of Women in National Security Studies and Diplomacy. Before joining the War College, she directed a master's program in global studies at our hometown Northeastern University. Prior to entering academia, she had a highly successful diplomatic career, 23 years as U.S. Foreign Service officer, Thank you. In leadership roles in the Czech Republic, Canada, Guatemala, Spain, and Washington, D.C. She retired with the rank of Minister Counselor, having received several superior and meritorious honor awards along the way. The new book has been praised by Senator Angus King of Maine as a finely crafted chart that can guide us, nautical reference, through rough seas ahead to a peaceful and prosperous future. And by World Affairs Council friend, Ambassador Paula Dobriansky, former Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs, called it a compelling testament to the importance of U.S. engagement and a must-read for policymakers. So here we are, and let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Mary Thompson-Jones.
Thank you very much, Mary. Speaking here is very humbling, particularly given that next week you'll be hosting Dr. Corey Shockey, one of my intellectual heroes, and Ambassador Nicholas Burns, one of my emotional, sentimental heroes. So you definitely have a stellar lineup. I will do my best to fill in. Thanks very much to World Boston, to Harrison, who set all this up and was quite patient. I think we exchanged about 16 emails along the way. Also thank you to Foley Lardner. I find it a very nice gesture of corporate social responsibility to offer a venue for what I consider to be civic engagement. And given the headlines these days, we cannot have too much civic engagement. So I take great value in the fact that this space is here for us tonight. I also have to say, the disclaimer, always important now more than ever. The views that you'll be hearing tonight are my own. They are not the views of the US government, the Department of Defense, the Department of the Navy, or even the US Naval War College. What probably reflects my views the most is my 23 years as a diplomat in the US Foreign Service. I am thrilled and honored that some diplomats are here tonight, so thank you for your support. And let's go ahead and get on with it. So, to talk about the Arctic, it's very old. In the minds of Americans, sometimes it's very new. And the slide on the left is one of my favorite because it goes all the way back to the Old Testament. People were already thinking about the Arctic. I love this passage from Job because it's poetic, and it says, "From the breath of God ice is given, and the broad waters are frozen." Other translations of this say, "Only God can make ice." Of course, we know that's not true, but as a poetic idea and as a way to imagine and as a way to work into the Arctic, I find it rather charming. The map on the right is the Septentrionalium Terrarum. It is from somebody that you all know as Mercator, who's responsible for some of the distortion that we see, which makes Greenland bigger than India, Greenland's bigger than Africa, Greenland's bigger than a god. But he got a couple of things right, and a couple of things that are interesting about the map. One is that this is a top-down look at the Arctic. First one to do that ever. So it's as though you're looking down at the North Pole. You'll notice that it's recognizable. You can see the outline of Scandinavia, Russia, Nova Zemlya, even back then, was known about. This is the Western Hemisphere. And here we have a semblance of Greenland. What's also fascinating is he described the black magnetic rock at the center of the North Pole, showing sort of intimations of the idea of magnetism, which I find fascinating. So, zooming ahead many centuries to North America, and specifically the United States, it's important to think about how Americans view the Arctic. And we actually have had a long Arctic presence. We really got serious about the Arctic in middle of the 1800s. And this painting by William Bradford actually hangs in Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And this is Greenland. It's also interesting that he took 2 photographers with him. Photography was really very nascent at this point. So the fact that he was working with them, and many of his paintings, this is just one exemplar, are based on photographs that he worked off of, is fascinating. And the photographs were later published, and it gives a nice timestamp on what Greenland and other parts of the Arctic and high north looked like back in the day. I also find, as a former Foreign Service officer, that culture is an important way in to understanding a country or a region or somewhere that I'm going to be looking at or working in. And these are just 2 of many that I could share with you. Rockwell Kent is interesting to me because he lived and worked in Greenland for 5 years in the early 1930s. I particularly like this painting that he did because it's a self-portrait of him painting. You see his sled dogs in the front. And if there's anyone who is an art history major, which I most certainly am not, it is somewhat reminiscent of Velázquez's Las Meninas, which is also an artist looking and seeing without the mirrors, of course, although the ice sometimes can serve as a mirror. The other artist to change media is music. This is John Luther Adams, one of the most important American composers of the 20th century. He lived and worked in a cabin just north of Fairbanks, Alaska, for many decades. And he wrote The Place Where You Go to Listen. He also wrote Becoming Oceans. He received a Pulitzer Prize for music based on his work, which has been performed in Carnegie Hall and other places. And this is him setting up his exhibit at the Museum of the North, which is in Fairbanks. So this is just to encourage the idea that we can talk about the Arctic as a security problem, as certainly we're hearing a lot about, but it's so much more than that. And I invite you to use your imagination in thinking about the Arctic more expansively. So what fascinates me is that back in 1900, we see an amazing paradigm shift. Here we have an artist's representation of the Franklin. This is the disaster, one of many. The Arctic is littered with ships from the age of sail that never made it. But what's interesting to me is that Europeans, not just Brits, but many Europeans, were searching for a passage through. So for them, the Arctic was a transportation problem. They wanted to solve it. They wanted to get through the Arctic to the other side, to Asia. Around 1900, an individual comes along and creates something which I realize is hard to read. It's a very old photo. It's the Arctic Coal Company. And perhaps if you have very good eyes, you can see that it says Boston, Massachusetts, USA, Longyear Valley, Spitsbergen Coal. This is the beginning of a really big change in the Arctic. This, of course, is John Monroe Longyear, and he lived about a mile away in Boston for much of his life. He originally was from the Midwest. He was a coal magnate, and he was on a voyage in the high north looking at the island, which was then called Spitsbergen, now called Svalbard. And he recognized that there was a big vein of coal and said, we should do something about this. So he set up a coal company and exploited it and ran it for a long time. Ultimately, it was sold to Norway and coal exploitation continued. What's interesting about Longyear, apart from the fact that he's honorary Bostonian, and there's a Longyear Museum, which his wife erected based on her religion, but nonetheless is still a reminder of his presence, is that he set off a whole century of American mega projects. So just a few of them, and I'll run through these quickly because I know you all have burning questions about the Arctic and I want to get to those. But it's impressive to consider what the United States did over the course of the century. The Alaska-Canada Highway was a marvelous feat of engineering at the time. It was built in 9 months. At the time, it was 1,600 miles. If you drive it today, it's about 1,300. At the time, it was hard track. It was designed for heavy military vehicles. We had tried to work with Canada to build it for a long time, but there was never a lot of impetus. But something happened in the early 1940s, and that was the Japanese entry into the war and the invasion of 2 of our Aleutian Islands, Kiska and Adak. When that happened, the United States considered it a national security priority to have a way to move troops from the east to the west coast. So what's also interesting to me is that a lot of the workers were military and a good portion of them were Black. They were not integrated in the military because that didn't come along until 1948, but their contribution, along with our Canadian friends, was extraordinarily important in building infrastructure that still matters and still exists to this day. Moving overseas for a second, we have Iceland. Iceland had been a dependency of Denmark's. The Nazi invasion of Denmark set Iceland free, and Iceland quickly was seen by the United States as a pivotal point in the air war of World War II. Airplanes of those days did not have the range, so the United States quickly moved in and built an airfield, an air base, and something beyond that, to the point that we had so many troops in Iceland that they were half the population of Icelanders themselves. As you might imagine, this caused a lot of friction. Not all Icelanders were in favor of this, but it's another interesting example of the impetus, the drive, the engineering aspect of American energy in the Arctic. Moving north of Iceland, of course, Thule, which is now Tufik Air Base, a space base in the northernmost part of Greenland, was one of about 24 bases of various sizes that America had during the Nazi invasion of Denmark. There was a great fear in FDR's administration that Greenland needed to be protected. Certainly the Greenlandic people were cut off. Denmark at the time was running this as a closed colony. So it was important to keep it open. It's also important to keep it open for a reason that may resonate today. There was a mine that had cryolite. Cryolite was the key ingredient in aluminum. Aluminum was super important because at this point, the United States was trying to build 1 airplane a day. Small airplane, but nonetheless, super important. So when you hear about critical minerals and critical materials, this is not the first time we've talked about it in conjunction with Greenland. Building Thule was a remarkable feat. This could only be done in the summertime, and we did it through ships. We had a long line of ships from Norfolk, stretching all the way up to northern Greenland, and built it as we went. At its peak, 10,000 service members, again, about half the population of all of Greenland back at the time. The dew line, also important. This is like a necklace of 63 bases, stations, some of them very small, nonetheless, part of a defensive line protecting North America from the perceived threat from the Soviet Union, and stretching from Alaska all the way to Greenland, built not only by the United States, but with help from Canadian and Alaskan and Greenlandic people as well. Moving forward quickly again, Alaska comes into play, discovery of oil in Prudhoe Bay. Big question is how to transport the oil, how to bring it to market. The first thought was, well, let's put it on a ship. To do this, we need to sail it through the Northwest Passage. In order to do that, we need an ice-hardened ship with a different kind of hull. USS Manhattan at the time was the largest ship, commercial ship that we had. And again, with a massive amount of money, a massive amount of manpower, and a very quick turnover, we were able to sail the Manhattan. We did this in cooperation with Canada and ran into a problem in McClure Strait over in the western side of the Northwest Passage, and we could not get our ship out without the help of Canadians. So we realized that, well, we aren't going to be able to use ships to do this. So instead, we did the very famous Alaska pipeline, 812 miles, took 4 years, tens of thousands of workers, and we built the hull line, the Dalton Hallway, right alongside it. So what does this tell us, this era of mega projects? Some good things, but some things that probably wouldn't work out well today. The Arctic is largely empty of people, certainly of labor. So building mega projects is not very practical because you're going to have to import massive numbers of workers from elsewhere. Although the example of Prudhoe Bay and the original example of the Longyear Coal Company, the America's Arctic Coal Company, were commercial ventures, many of the ones that I spoke about between those were military-driven ventures. That's true in Alaska today. There are people who say that Alaska wouldn't exist if it were not for the American military. Clearly, these were built roughly. The Alcan Highway is sometimes called the Oil Can Highway because workers, as they built, discarded things. In fairness to them, there was no recycling, there was nowhere to put them. But for years, you could see all the trash of construction along the full length of the highway. There's also the practical issues, the engineering problems, maintenance. Stuff doesn't last in extreme temperatures. You get metal fatigue, challenges of cold weather. Workers cannot work a shift the way they could here. People need to burn more calories in order to be in extreme temperatures. Their shifts are shorter. They need to come in. They also have many months of the year, no matter how warm it gets, it will still be dark. So that has another factor in terms of what you can do. And finally, a topic that is of increasing resonance today, all of these projects were done without consultation or involvement or inclusion of Indigenous peoples. And while the Arctic may be very sparsely populated, it is not empty. There are many inhabitants there, and we'll get to that in a second. So, geographically speaking, it's relevant to ask, well, which Arctic are we talking about? The blue line is the classic definition, 66.34 degrees north latitude. That's the classic definition. A lot of people, including scientists, have found that's not particularly useful anymore. The International Maritime Organization, for example, UN agency, which governs maritime shipping around the world and also has a polar code, has decided that it makes sense that it's 60 degrees north latitude. 60 degrees is right here. That's interesting. It just catches the tip of Greenland. It also goes right through capitals of Oslo, Stockholm, almost St. Petersburg. Moscow is well south of that still, and around. So that might make sense in some ways, but there are other ways too. The 10 degrees Celsius isotherm line, the line at which you don't have any area that ever reaches a temperature of more than 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. The tree line is yet another. This orange line here is the isotherm line. You can see it's very irregular. The tree line, more irregular still. And of course, that's changing all the time as global warming takes place and we're seeing changes in flora and fauna. We'll talk also about what that means in a maritime sense, because people talk about boundaries in the Arctic all the time. This is the classic US view of where the Arctic is. It's not a view that any other country would have because it's got this interesting bulge. And it's a little bit out of focus there, but this bisects Alaska. There are certain key Alaskan rivers that are relevant, and it includes the Aleutian Island chain. Understandable that the United States would be interested in including that because of the experience of losing two of the Aleutian Islands to Japanese occupation for 18 months during World War II. This goes back to 1982. This is still the legal definition in the United States of its Arctic. Now, I mentioned that the Arctic is inhabited. Looking only at the Western Hemisphere side of the Arctic, we see large numbers of native peoples, Inuit people in the case of Alaska and Canada, Nunavut, Canada's newest territory, which is meant to be a territory for Canada's First Nations peoples, and of course, Greenlandic people. They are increasingly interested in asserting sovereignty. They have talked about having an Inuit Circumpolar Council. This was founded back in the late 1980s by an Alaskan American who thought that they had more in common with each other than they did with their respective capitals in Ottawa, Washington, or Copenhagen. It's not taken off in the sense that it's become a classic Westphalian state in terms of asserting its sovereignty, but it's given native peoples in the Arctic a chance to confer, to consider common problems, particularly in the era of climate change. So we also have other ways of demarcating the Arctic, particularly when it comes to the maritime. This is based on UNCLOS, the UN Law of the Sea Treaty. The United States is not a signatory to this, but we observe it. And when you get past the 12-mile limit and you get past the 200-mile limit, what you have left is this little bathtub in the middle of the Arctic. We've recently filed under the Biden administration an extended continental shelf claim that has nothing to do with rite of passage on the sea surface, but it does allow us to claim all of the minerals underneath the sea, the water pillar. So there's many different ways of talking about the geography and how people consider what is the Arctic. So here we are today. It's been a long time since all those mega projects came and went. So what are we seeing? And I thought we could talk about 5 areas, although I'm certainly open to additional questions. Obviously, climate. Climate is the variable that matters in the Arctic right now. And we've got lots of different aspects to it. Certainly sea ice, melting, global warming. There's also the future of Greenland. It's impossible to ignore it. It's been in the newspapers. It's a major headline. It's informed that Secretary of Defense Peter Hegseth was asked about it today in a congressional hearing. Since I come from a maritime school, I hear a lot about icebreakers from our Coast Guard friends down the road in New London, Connecticut, and the lack of them, and the lack of a presence in the Arctic. So I'd like to come back and talk a little bit more about that with all of you. Contested territory. We've got some interesting things happening in terms of NATO because of Ukraine. And lastly, I have one example about how it's important to think about policy not only from Washington, D.C., but also from the point of view of the 50 states. And I do hear a lot about Alaska, which is admittedly America's Arctic gateway. It is the Arctic state, the reason why we call ourselves an Arctic nation. But I'm also enamored of the state of Maine and some interesting things that Maine has done to position itself as a bookend to Alaska. So let me quickly go through those and then we can get to your questions. So You may have seen this in many different forms. We've had essentially 40% loss of sea ice in 40 years. It's an easy statistic to remember. There's 2 points each year. The reason why this starts in 1979 is because that's the year that we were first able to send satellites over the Arctic. So we have what is great, bounded data set. And we can see this every year. There's a sea ice minimum and a sea ice maximum. The sea ice minimum occurs in September. We expect there to be less sea ice in September because we've had the whole summer for the ice to melt. The sea ice maximum occurs March 30th. And so we see these data points. There are some amazing US government scientific institutions. One of them is the US Snow and Ice Data Center, which has lots of moving parts, bells and whistles. You can really get into this. I know school classes sometimes do this and students study this extensively. And I think it's a great example of citizen science. Of course, the Arctic is more than a maritime domain. It's also a terrestrial domain. What's happening on the ground is equally alarming. We're seeing a loss of permafrost. Now, people think that permafrost is ground that has been frozen forever. In fact, the scientific definition of permafrost is just 2 years. It's ground that never thawed out during the summer. Now, it is true that a lot of the terrain in the Arctic has been frozen for millennia, but it is thawing. And there are consequences to that. Certainly lost habitat in terms of animal life, but also for humans, lost homes, lost villages. Alaska has seen lots of indigenous villages literally fall into the sea. It has gone through the painful process of relocating people. This matters because of ancestral obligations, hunting, fishing, their connection to the land. So this is not as easy as just moving out a kid at the end of his year at Boston University and on he goes. What's in the permafrost? Good question. We are learning every year, every summer. There are pathogens. We've seen this over in the Russian section of the Arctic, where under the USSR, there were some experiments with anthrax. There are native peoples in Russia, the Nenets, among others, who herd reindeer. And as the ground softens, the reindeers paw up lots of dirt and pathogens are released, anthrax among them, and many reindeer have died. People eat the infected reindeer and they have died as well. And of course, infrastructure challenges, you see roads buckling, all kinds of problems as the ground softens. Now, the Greenland crisis. So we've seen a lot in the last 3 months about this. My own thought is that if Greenland wanted to be independent, it could be. Denmark's not stopping it. Greenland has had home rule for 45 years. It's had self-rule for more than 15, 16 years now. It recently had an election. It chose not the political party that wanted immediate independence, but a party that was slightly more conservative. All Greenlandic people would ultimately like to be independent. The debate is about when and how. It's possible that it could decide the status quo is the best way to go. There's a lot of talk here, not there, about the takeover from the United States. There may be a third solution as well. Trade associations with other nation states. One of the interesting things about Greenland is that Danish King Frederik X recently redid the coat of arms. He included the rampant polar bear as a symbol of Greenland and the ram as a symbol of the Faroe Islands, also part of the Danish realm. And he beefed up the two guys there and he made their sticks a little larger. So the Danish kingdom and Danes have seen this for a long time as part of the Danish realm. The United States sees the Western Hemisphere, going back to President Monroe, as part of its turf. So there's more here at stake than just President Trump and some very undiplomatic things that were said. there's some history here that will have to be sorted. What strikes me about the talk on both sides is that it kind of denies agency to Greenlanders. The United States side definitely sees this as a security question, end of story. The king is more emotional about this, talks about the length of history, the length of time. Neither really seems to address the idea of a future where the Greenlandic people might go. Moving on very quickly, as I said, maritime stuff matters where I'm from, and we look at presence. Presence means you have to be there. How do you get to the Arctic? Well, you need ships. We don't have ships. We have 2 polar security cutters. One is dedicated to Antarctica, which is a whole other research question. The other one is quite old, needs replacing. As you see here, we've struggled to replace it. We have just finished the hull in Pascagoula, Mississippi. It's now on its way to Seattle, where it will be fitted for many years before it's ready for sea trials in its home base, ultimately in Juneau. This is part of a larger problem. The US is struggling to build ships of any kind, military or civilian, and this goes well beyond the Arctic, but the Arctic is bearing the brunt of the problem. There have been some solutions. Everyone knows the 2 gentlemen on the left. This is less than a year ago. The gentleman in the middle is Alexander Stubb. He's the president of Finland, which makes great icebreakers to defeat icebergs in record time. They signed a pact, and President Stubb actually went to Mar-a-Lago to see if he could interest the Trump administration in keeping this going. He was uniquely qualified to do this. He studied in the United States as a kid, and he is a golfer. In fact, he had a golfing scholarship to Furman University, where he graduated. He speaks beautiful English, and he and Trump hit it off. So we may actually see this continue. It should be a win-win, a triple win for all sides, because it's a great example of collaboration. Yes, the Arctic has been militarized. Our friends in Alaska, Senator Sullivan, created this map. What's not clear is that not all Russian bases are created equal, particularly when you get to the western side. Some of these are barely built, barely manned, barely staffed. Nonetheless, it makes the point that there's been a significant Russian military buildup. Well, Russia invaded Ukraine, and we saw the rapid entry of Finland and Sweden into NATO. These are Arctic nations, and the fact that they are now part of NATO means that all of the Arctic, with the exception of Russia, is bound by Article 5, the idea of mutual defense. So my solution to all of this, I mentioned at the beginning, my background as a diplomat. I think we need other ways of engaging beyond looking at this as a security problem. Maine has the idea to juxtapose itself with Alaska. And one of the things it's done is to build up its port, and it captured a contract with Ameskip, which is the leading Icelandic shipping company. You can go to Portland. I go there frequently, my husband, and you can't help but see Ameskip cargo containers all over. They've since added a huge facility for cold storage. There's roll-on, roll-off capabilities. Maine also is engaged in citizen diplomacy, which I am really passionate about. Governor Janet Mills sent the largest delegation ever to an annual gathering in Iceland called the Arctic Circle. These people represent academia, business, trade, politicians, others, and she met, and they did, with their counterparts. She signed deals with Finland, with other countries as well. And here is the map that shows how Portland, or Maine as a whole, can be a gateway to the Arctic. Lastly, we have diplomacy. This, my own photo, is the American consulate in Nuuk. This is, people think about embassies and consulates as giant, impenetrable fortresses, and yeah, they are. But this is just a little house. It's staffed with 3 Americans, or it was when I went there, a public affairs, public diplomacy officer, and 2 people from USAID. They were there to engage Greenlandic people in small business opportunities and to work with them to help them make connections with American interested partners, and also to work on educational and cultural exchanges. The other slide is in Bowdoin, a college in Maine, and this is the US, Denmark, Greenland, you see all the flags there, Joint Commission. This was founded back in 2004. This has been meeting for more than 20 years, all about how to enhance relationships, quite apart from security. That's not part of the mandate. They meet in different countries each time, and they happen to be in the state of Maine this time. But this is an example of the way forward. So my conclusion is that what we need here to up our presence and up our game in the Arctic is connections, relationships, trust, commerce, and respect for our Arctic partners. I'll take your questions.
Great. All right. We will take it. Okay, let's go to Ed Martin because he's right up here in front.
Thank you very much for your talk today. I have a question. When you talk about Greenland independence, I believe there's only about 50,000 people in Greenland. I mean, there's more people in Dorchester. How viable would it be as an independent state? I mean, it sounds good, but really, how could they do it?
Well, you've really put your finger on a key problem. The current population is about 57,000, as you say. It's the least densely populated place in the world. The terrain is vast. 1/2 of it almost is a national park. The eastern part of Greenland is really quite empty. Most of the population is strung along the southwest coast. So yes, it would be difficult. The labor force would be a fraction of the 56,000 people. The number of educated Greenlanders is small, not because they're not interested, but because some of them live in very small communities, and getting to a high school or a vocational school or university pretty much means having to leave home, which is hard and painful and difficult, or for university, although there is a very fine university that I have visited in Nuuk, otherwise they're going to Copenhagen for their advanced education. These are problems that Greenlandic people will have to work out. With Denmark, we don't have a direct role in that. I will differ with people who might have said otherwise. And I think we have to let that play out. I think we could be helpful. I think trade, investment, exchanges, education are all great things. The summit camp in the center of Greenland is a great scientific enterprise that's international, but run by the National Science Foundation. The 109th Air Wing of the National Guard, a good use of the National Guard in New York, provides the lift every summer. Right now, they're already bringing in scientists, their materials, machinery, everything they need to survive in the very center of Greenland. So yes, but bringing industry, difficult. Scaling this, tourism, difficult because you don't want to leave a big footprint. So it's a conundrum. But I'm the wrong person to answer the problem. The person who needs to answer that problem is a Greenlandic person. And we need to let the Greenlandic people speak more for themselves, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to take Roel's question, and I also want to note that if you're new at Royal Boston or if you're a student, don't be shy. So go ahead, Roel.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk. Considering that the Arctic ice is rapidly disappearing during the summers, and we can expect that it will be free of ice for a large number of months of the year. We're going to have conflicts between the seabed mining claims that are occurring there. What is happening in the United States and elsewhere to resolve those questions before that happens?
Oh, it's a real free-for-all. Yeah. If we're talking about open sea mining, the fact that we have claimed our own extended continental shelf 200 miles out from the Alaska coastline answers your question somewhat. However, there's the open ocean area too. Not all the extended continental shelf claims have yet been adjudicated. The big one is Lomonosov Ridge, which is between Russia and the northern part of Greenland. Denmark has filed a claim on behalf of Greenland, and the United Nations Commission will adjudicate it. Importantly, those opinions are advisory. It's left for the nation states to work it out among themselves. Canada has also claimed its extended continental shelf. We clash a little bit with Canada over in the western part of the Arctic in the Beaufort Sea. So we have some work to do, some diplomatic and negotiating work to do to clarify that. So yeah, I mean, it's a problem.
Okay, yes, Matt, a World Boston alumnus.
Hi, thank you for your talk. So we've discussed a lot about U.S. tensions with Greenland as it relates to acquisition, but obviously we know that's not the only Arctic partner that the U.S. has expressed interest in acquiring. With Lewis, talk about Canada becoming the 51st state. How do you see potentially deteriorating relations with Canada as affecting Arctic cooperation efforts in a whole range of issues?
What a great question. Thanks. I've served in Canada as a diplomat. I was based in Montreal, but I covered all of Eastern Canada and went frequently up to Newfoundland. Not the Arctic, but closer. Yeah, it's a problem. That's one reason I ended the talk talking about a state, because it's not only the federal government that makes policy, the 50 states also make policy. And it's not just the state of Maine that has a border with Canada and is looking upward toward the Arctic. There's a whole ring of northern tiered states from state of Washington going all the way across to the state of Maine that also live and work with Canada and Canadians on a daily basis. $1 billion of trade a day flows between the borders. That's still the case. So we've seen a lot of strong language coming out of Washington. I would like to say hyperbole. This hasn't been translated into policy yet. I think the Canadian election and the new premier did a good job of asserting Canada's sovereignty, including in the visit to the Oval Office. But the heart of your question goes to, what are we doing with our relationships? And are we throwing these away? And these are among our most valuable relationships in the world. These countries have been our allies from time immemorial. And it's disheartening to see combative talk. But I don't think that Canadians, I mean, I can't speak for them, but I hear that they understand that not all Americans necessarily subscribe to the idea of the 51st state.
Okay.
You
Right
see
here.
why I did the disclaimer. I'm not speaking for the US
Yes.
government.
Right up front. Go ahead.
Hello, first of all, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I'm wondering your thoughts about the role of non-state actors, because the governance system of Arctic very decentralized, so it depends on regional, bilateral, and soft laws system. And for some of the companies / organizations which wants to do some geoengineering activities there, it creates a very convenient environment, but it has an impact in the Arctic and indigenous communities. So I was wondering your thoughts about it.
It does, yes. The idea of geoengineering is a great and in some ways promising field to counteract some of the problems of global warming. Not all of the solutions are environmentally friendly either. And Native peoples, as you pointed out, are not necessarily in favor of this. one of the things that I have liked in scientific protocols, including at our National Science Foundation and other governmental science bodies, is protocols that are written right into their research guidelines that say scientists seeking grants must connect with Indigenous communities if they're working geographically in a particular place. And I'm not a scientist, but we've seen a lot of recent research design that includes viewpoints of Native peoples. And I think that's only going to improve the research because it taps into a body of knowledge that we would be silly to ignore. And I think scientists have been really at the forefront of embracing this idea. So I think we will see improved research designs and research projects and interesting findings in the future. I don't know about geoengineering. I mean, I know what I just said, but I wish that it could work better because I think we all are hopeful for some sort of solution to the climate crisis in the Arctic. This may not be the one.
Okay, I do want to leave important time for purchasing the book. So with that, I hope that you'll join me in thanking Mary Thompson-Jones.